Do you remember when you were probably smaller, a child, along on a trip, and you would ask your parents, "Are we there yet?" Organizing the speech is the same thing. You have to think about your audience, letting them know that you have an organized structure, that there's a clear path to getting to your end destination or your purpose for your speech, and transferring that knowledge to your audience. Today we're going to discuss organizing the message and then look at introductions and conclusions. We're going to begin by realizing what the benefits are to organizing your speech. First of all, I'm going to give you an analogy. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Atlanta. Maybe many of you are from Atlanta. But let's say that you don't necessarily know me and you don't know the way to Atlanta. But I come up to you and I ask you if you want to go on a day trip with me to Atlanta. Now, if you've never been, how likely are you to get in the car with me? Maybe not so much. Now, if I were to say instead, I have an extra ticket to Six Flags and I'm going to take a day trip to Atlanta. Would you like to go? You might be more willing to get in the car with me. But once again, if you've never been to Atlanta, if you're from, let's say, Austin, Texas, or New York, then you might have some apprehension about how we're going to get there and how long it's going to take. A more effective way for me to invite you on this trip for the day would be to say, you know, I have an extra ticket to Six Flags. We're going to go to Atlanta for the day, and I'd love for you to come along. We're going to get on I-20, and it's going to take us about 3.5 hours. First, we're going to hit Birmingham in about an hour. From Birmingham, we're going to go to Anniston, and then from Anniston to Atlanta, it'll be about an hour and 15 or 20 minutes. When we're getting close, we're going to crest this hill and we're going to see the Atlanta skyline. And you know that we're almost at Six Flags. Now, how more willing are you to get in that car with me? Plus, while you're on the ride, you know that, hey, you see me turn on I-20. You feel pretty confident about I know where I'm going. Secondly, we go through Birmingham and then we go to Anniston. These are things that I've told you that we're going to see along the way. You feel confident about the progression of that trip. And then finally we crest the hill and we see the Atlanta skyline and you know that we're close to Six Flags. Giving a speech is very much like going on a trip. You are asking the audience to go along with you for the next 5 or 10 minutes. And you want to render them in a position where they feel confident about going on that trip with you and they're eager to listen. So the benefits of organizing a message is that, first of all, it decreases apprehension or uncertainty about where that speaker is taking the audience. Secondly, it increases the comprehension because I've told you ahead of time where we're going to go, and then along the way, you're seeing those signposts. So it increases comprehension and retention of that message. This is vitally important as you go out into the career world and you're having to give a presentation for people that you really want to remember your message. So these are the benefits. Let's look now at the general idea of the speech, right? You have to know, first of all, what is my specific purpose? Not just my topic. So I have a topic. It's going to Atlanta. My purpose would then be, my general purpose would be to persuade you to go with me. And then finally, my specific purpose would be, today I'm going to persuade you to go on a trip to Six Flags with me for the day. So understanding that we have a general idea of what our topic is and more specifically what we want the audience to understand, to be informed of, or to be persuaded about. Then we follow what you typically follow in any paper. You have an introduction. You create that body first. We know that topic, the general purpose and the specific purpose, and now we're going to develop 3 main points. For your demonstration speech, as this is your first speech and it's only 3 to 5 minutes, I would recommend that you only have 2 main points. Maybe you give a background on the topic, and then you look at how it works or how to do it. So I'm going to link the example that I have at the end of this Prezi in with the file for this video. In the example, a girl is giving a speech about sign language. And she's teaching the audience how to do a simple phrase, "You are my friend," in sign language. She does a brilliant job at having a strong introduction, which we'll talk about in a moment, but having 2 basic main points. First, I'm going to talk to you about the importance of sign language, and a little history, and she establishes credibility in that main point, that first main point, by citing sources and relevant experience. And then in her second main point, she says, and now I'm going to show you how to do a phrase in American Sign Language. And she walks the audience through that. But as we get into larger speeches, informative and persuasive, you're going to have 3 main points. And you're going to structure that speech around those 3 main points. And much like that trip to Atlanta, you're going to take your audience along the way with you on that trip. Of course, those 3, I wouldn't say go to 5, although if you look in the textbook, it says you can have up to 5 main points. I really think that your audience gets lost after 3, and 3 is very, it's memorable, more than 5. It's a little too much. But make sure that with those 3 main points that you have sub-points, you have some structure behind it that's developing it. And then, of course, a conclusion. So, simple enough. Now, let's look at the 6 patterns of speech organization. So in other words, you know that you have a speech, and you're going to have to create a pattern of organization that's logical for your audience. Now, the first pattern of organization is chronological. In other words, the order of time. So let's go back to that demonstration speech example. We can talk about the history of sign language and then show the progression of how to do something. So we're starting kind of back with some background, and then in my how-to or my process of showing you, demonstrating, I'm taking you through a logical, chronological order of you do this first, then, and then finally, right? So a chronological order. If you look at an informative speech, you can still have a chronological order. Let's say that you're talking about women's right to vote, and you look at the history of that and how it's progressed through time, and then currently how many women in this country are voting, are actually participating. And so you can do from a historical perspective to current day. The second type of speech pattern is spatial. And now while I have kind of talking about space in a big way, really spatial can be small to large or near to far. So let's take the topic of the theory of global warming. You could discuss what it is, the basic theory. You could then talk about how theoretically it impacts our planet, then our state, and then finally you as an individual. So you're going from a large perspective to a smaller, more personal perspective. So that's one example of a spatial pattern of organization. The third is compare and contrast. You could look at the University of Alabama versus Florida State. Comparing and contrasting. What types of universities, or even if you want to go down to football program, what's similar and what's different. Remember, in an informative speech, as you move forward into that, you're going to make sure that you're not trying to persuade the audience of anything. You're going to give a level field of, I'm looking at each of these categories in these 2 different areas, and I am comparing and contrasting them. But I'm not trying to convince you of anything or persuade you. Once again, if we go back to that spatial pattern, and we're talking about the theory of global warming, if I'm using that as an informative speech, then I'm also going to give you a balanced perspective of how possibly it's not. It's been denied by experts. But if I want to make it a persuasive speech, then I can talk more about how it is impacting the world, our state, and then your neighborhood. So compare and contrast is the third type of organizational pattern. Now, let's say that we want to look at a categorical pattern. We've done compare and contrast, now we're looking at categorical. So one example of categorical that I came up with is football divisions or athletic divisions within our United States. So we have the ACC, the SEC, and the Pac-10. That could be 3 different main points that you are using. First, I'm going to look at, and make sure that there's parallelism, right? You're going to look at 3 different, possibly, factors of each one and compare and contrast categorically, or even talk about them categorically. ACC does this and has this, the SEC, and then Pac-10. So, we've got categorical, And then finally, you have two different types of persuasive organizational patterns. When you do your persuasive speech, you are going to follow one of these two patterns. And honestly, I would go with the first. Now, the reason I have a picture of the Republican debate is because if someone is trying to be persuasive, what they do is they follow one of these two categories. First of all, problem, cause, solution, and then secondly, cause, effect, solution. Therefore, your main point would be the problem, defining it, discussing it. What experts define it in the way that you're trying to discuss it with your audience. So going back to credible background and definition. Then you look at the causes of that problem. What created the problem? What's going on currently or in the past that contributed to the problem? And then finally, your third main point would be offering solutions. And possibly more than one, but you are going to offer a better solution than others. And then finally, you're going to give a call to action for your audience. So what you want is for them to take part in some form of a solution for that problem or that exigence, that issue that you have brought to light in your speech. Now, if the politicians are doing this correctly, then someone is going to say, this is a problem, immigration. Here are the causes of this problem. And then finally, and when they're talking about the problem, they're going to give facts and statistics according to credible sources that are current, objective, and reliable. And then they're going to talk about the causes of that problem. Once again, they're going to back that claim up. And then they're going to offer their own solution for that problem. And one way, hopefully, they're trying to persuade us that their solution is better than other candidates' solution. The second way is cause, talking about the causes, then the effects, then the solution itself. I would recommend going with the first, problem, cause, solution. I think that's the clearest and that's the easiest way for you to organize your persuasive speech. Now that we've discussed the basic overall structure of your speech, then you go back and you talk about how can I bring some creativity to that topic? How am I going to introduce the topic and the speech to my audience in a way that excites them, that they know that I'm a credible source, that that I'm enthusiastic about this issue, and that somehow it's relevant to them? Remember, what's in it for me? That's what they're asking themselves. So we have to understand that an introduction makes a first impression for our audience. What you don't want to do is come into the speech. Now I'm going to get off camera here. And what you never want to do is this. Hi, my name is Alexa Chilcutt, and I'm going to talk about organizational patterns today. No, we know who you are. You know who I am. I should not begin a speech by introducing myself. In fact, what I should do is I should make a first impression that secures the audience's attention, that sets the tone for the message itself, and that clarifies my purpose for and the direction of that speech. Now, how am I going to do that without saying, hello, my name is? This is pretty important. You have an attention-getting device. There are many different devices that you can use. So, a shocking fact or statistic, a quote from a famous person, a joke, which can be a little risky, a rhetorical question. Imagine a world with no cell phones. Then I'm going to link that to my topic, and possibly whatever my topic is, it's going to be related back to that attention getter. If you remember the very first video that I posted, my attention getter was death, snakes, and public speaking. What do these three have in common? That was my attention-getting device. And at the end, I did the same thing. I said death, snakes, and public speaking. Today we've talked about X, Y, and Z, but death is inevitable, although we want to put it off as long as humanly possible. Snakes are avoidable if you're looking out, but public speaking is an opportunity. I had an attention getter. So your attention getter could be, begin your speech with a famous quote. 74% of Americans have some form of public speaking apprehension, some kind of quote or statistic. That's how you begin the first words out of your mouth for your speech to capture your audience's attention. Then you link that to your topic, and then you have some kind of significant statement which can be combined with a source. So according to a 2016 Pew Research poll, X. So I'm going to make it significant for my audience, and I'm going to have a source that makes my audience feel like I'm credible. And then I'm going to do that preview statement. This is what I'm going to talk to you about. First, we're going to do this, second, and third. First, we're going to see Birmingham, Anniston, and then Atlanta. You have to tell people where you're going. So, an introduction. As I said, I am going to link this video into your Blackboard shell so that you can watch it, because it is a wonderful example of an effective demonstration speech. Now finally, our conclusions. Much like the introduction, the conclusion is going to do the same thing. It's the old axiom: tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. In that introduction, we grabbed their attention and we told them what we were going to tell them. This is my topic, this is why it's important, and this is how I'm going to get there. First, I'm going to tell you this, second, third. We're going to go through those main points, transitioning through each. And then finally, we're going to get to our conclusion. How many of you have been in presentations, or you've done presentations, where you get to the end, and the end is a click question slide? That's all. How awkward. How awkward is that? And then your audience is doing this. No. What we want is for you to have a solid conclusion. It's closure. It's closure for that speech. And it signals to your audience that now I'm done. And I'm ending on as strong a note as I began. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to restate my thesis. Today, I was trying to convince you to go on a trip with me to Atlanta. What was in Atlanta? It was Six Flags. I had an extra ticket. But I wanted to tell you how we were going to get there. First, we previewed the route. We were going on I-20 through Birmingham. Then we looked at riding through Anniston. There was a Chick-fil-A and a Starbucks there. And then finally, we crested the hill to Atlanta. You're going to tell the audience where you've been. And then if you began with a shocking factor statistic, you're going to end with a shocking factor statistic. If you began with a rhetorical question, then you can end with a rhetorical question. If you began with a quote, you're going to end with a quote. And that gives you an opportunity to end with a strong message that doesn't leave you or the audience hanging. So, when we look at returning to that attention-getting device, then this is the best way to close and to really make that speech fully formed and digestible to your audience, and the audience willing to listen. I'll see you next week.